So very happy and excited to introduce Molly Alves. Molly works with the I should be able to say that, Tuella in her
Tuella, so close.
And was instrumental in passing Washington State's RCW allowing Beaver relocation in 2012 and the revision that occurred in 2017. She's been very key working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife statewide in Washington and Beaver relocation permit program, and with the Utah Beaver Project, Beavers Northwest, and the Cowlitz Tribe. Molly leads trainings and workshops on trap setting, release, site selection, husbandry, and caretaking across the Pacific Northwest. And on top of all of that, she is a current master's student with Dr. Julie Young at Utah State's Wildland Resources Department, and she's going to be speaking about her master's research today. And on top of even all of that, she is an author on countless book chapters, podcasts, and news articles. And I have not seen it, but I know to go look for it. This new superstar of NBC's Wild Kingdom related to Beaver. And so I encourage everybody maybe to search YouTube for her and that episode. Molly, are you ready to start?
I am. Let me just pull up the share screen. And everyone, let me know if you can see it.
Looks good.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm very excited to be back here engaging with this group. It's been a little over a year because, as Sandra just kind of explained, I've been pretty busy. But when I was here about a year ago, I was just getting started with my master's program and kind of introduced my hypothetical research at the time to you all. So I'm really, really happy to be back and have the opportunity to tell you kind of where this research is at and where it's going. And so, let's see, good, working. So after my chat with you all about a year ago, I was kind of talking through options of how to reach the maximum number of people for this research, which is looking at the methodologies and policies that are enabling or disabling beaver relocation around the globe. And so with my advisors, Dr. Julie Young and Dr. Emily Fairfax, we developed this survey that was disseminated to most, if not all, of the folks relocating beavers across the US, Canada, and Europe. And from that, we got about 40 responses, which led to a very large amount of data that I am still trying to sort through. But today, I'm really excited to share kind of some of the preliminary results from that survey. And I want to focus on these key topics. We surveyed folks about all aspects of their methods from start to finish, from trapping beavers to release to post-release monitoring. But these were really the key trends that came out in terms of importance for realizing success in these beaver translocation efforts. And so one of the biggest factors and really at times limiting factors for a lot of these programs is their funding mechanisms. A lot of these projects are government or grant funded, and those that were grant funded said that it's really difficult to scale up projects using grant funding. A lot of these grants that are available to beaver relocation programs don't supply monitoring funding, which has been an enormous limitation in terms of the data and success stories that are able to be disseminated by these relocation groups. Another thing that we found is because of the lack of monitoring funding, most folks are not able to do control studies where they're doing a comparison of baseline conditions to post-beaver relocation conditions. And so originally my hope had been to produce a meta-analysis of the methodologies being used by all of these programs And we found that we were not able to do that because in order to do a proper meta-analysis, you need these control metrics. And most programs, whether they're publishing or not publishing their data, don't have those baseline conditions to compare what beavers are doing on the ground to. And so other folks said funding for translocation has been difficult. And then there's nonprofits that have private donors or are receiving funds from local, state, and sportsman groups. But overall, most folks said that achieving long-term funding for these programs can be very difficult. And I should have said this at the beginning. This presentation is pretty figure heavy. If there are questions along the way, please feel free to interrupt me. And if there's any discussion that sparks as we go through these slides, please feel free to interrupt or raise your hand. One of the most interesting things to me as I've received information from the survey respondents is that they're really all over the board in terms of their reason for doing translocation. Most folks, of course, said that they're interested in habitat restoration, leveraging the ecosystem engineering abilities of beavers in the places that they're placing them. Most folks from across the pond over in Europe said that they're relocating beavers for rewilding purposes. But then there were 66% of folks that said they're really just moving beavers in order to preclude lethal management. And this to me shows a real gap in the policies that are driving beaver management activities. There's still a lot of lethal management happening, and folks are starting to relocate beavers simply just to preserve them on the landscape, although in a new place. And then, of course, along the lines of rewilding, folks are looking to assist beavers in recolonizing portions of their historic territory that they no longer occupy or are struggling to recolonize naturally. We asked folks about their capture criteria. Most folks said that they are, in fact, targeting family groups or mated pairs, but are also capturing individuals. I know from our experience on the Tulalip Beaver Project, sometimes it's not possible to capture mated pairs or entire family groups because we're trapping in areas that historically beavers have been lethally managed. So sometimes we're capturing these fragmented family groups and they aren't necessarily helping us meet our restoration goals in the areas that we're placing them. So we really need to look at those policies and see if there are ways that we can reduce lethal management so that projects like ours that are moving beavers for restoration purposes can actually achieve those goals. And then we wanted to know why people were moving beavers. What is the capture criteria? Of course, most people said nuisance. It was interesting that a lot of folks, 44%, said that they considered coexistence, but there were many cases where coexistence either did not work or was not possible or was not permitted. Again, going back to policies. And then lethal management preclusion was a big one as well. We asked folks about their husbandry, if they are temporarily housing beavers, what we call a soft release, or if they're just taking beavers straight from the trap site to the relocation site in what we call a hard release. And this graph shows responses from folks that are not required by law to house beavers temporarily, either for quarantine purposes or capturing entire family groups. And of the folks that are not required to house beavers, it seems that most are opting to. And the reasons that they're doing that is either for that quarantine purpose or for biological testing or tagging beavers prior to release. And then, of course, most groups are attempting to capture entire family groups or mated pairs in the hopes of establishing breeding populations. And then there were actually a few that said that they were awaiting release site selection, which means that they're capturing beavers without knowing yet where those beavers are going to be placed. So this is, I know it's kind of small, you might not be able to see this, but this is the site scorecard that the Tulalip Beaver Project uses to determine where we're going to place beavers. And we do this prior to even thinking about capturing beavers. At any given time, we have about 30 sites that we're actively monitoring across 3 watersheds. And we have sites available that we know of before we select beavers to be relocated. And we're looking at things like water availability, food availability, the stream gradient, anything that will make those beavers want to stay and be able to effectively alter the habitat. And so we wanted to know from folks what they do, if anything, to prepare relocation sites for release. Whopping 89% of people said that they are installing beaver dam analogs, which is definitely growing in popularity, and there's a lot of new research coming out about the effect of BDAs. And so that's great to see. Some folks are constructing temporary lodges or providing forage, but there's some people that are just kind of dropping beavers where they think the habitat looks suitable enough and seeing what happens. And then I asked if beavers are being translocated to similar habitat types as the one in which they were captured. And most people said sometimes, or it depends. Obviously, in our case, beavers are usually captured at lower elevations and are being moved to headwater streams, but we work to ensure that there are similar food types at those locations. So we know that there is forage that those specific animals prefer. And then post-relocation monitoring is a big one. A lot of people, again, are limited in their funding capacity or just their staffing capacity to really effectively monitor these sites for what is occurring on these landscapes as beavers are being relocated and moving around the landscape. Most people are really just looking at beaver presence and absence. They have a specific monitoring reach where the beavers are placed. For us, it's a 1/4 mile upstream and a 1/4 mile downstream of the release site. And they're just seeing, are beavers there or are they not? And if they're not, that is considered under their definition of success, a failed relocation attempt. There are about 79% of people are looking for dam or lodge construction, and a few people are in fact looking at hydrologic impact. And those are the folks that are really collecting the most amount of data and seeing how beavers are altering the landscape rather than if they are just establishing and staying put. So we asked if folks were monitoring beaver establishment or movement. Most said yes. Most are saying that there's periodic observations of dam building, or if they're free living populations. It seemed that a lot of folks were really just interested in beavers staying exactly where they're placed, establishing long enough to reproduce as a measure of success. And if folks were monitoring dam construction, we asked if they were measuring those structures and their impacts. And it seemed that most folks said no or sometimes. Again, going back to funding limited funding available to actually spend the time to measure the results of this dam building activity. We asked folks how they are doing post-relocation monitoring. Again, looking at presence and absence, most people are just going and walking that stream and seeing if there's sign of beavers on site. And if not, then they consider that a failed relocation. 59% of folks are using game cameras, which is great to see. And then folks are using UAVs or drones. We do that on our project to measure surface water increases at these sites. And then a small amount of people, though a growing amount of these programs are starting to experiment with VHS or GPS tagging or pit tagging to get an understanding of how these beavers are moving around the landscape post-relocation. And so this was the fun one for me and has been quite the challenge in trying to compare these projects, because it seems that most programs define success differently. And how you define success really, really has an effect on how people view these relocation programs. So folks said that they're looking for reproduction, reproduction with juvenile dispersal. There were even some projects that just said there was no mortality during the relocation process from capture to release. If no beavers died, that's 100% success. Evidence of dam and lodge construction. And then there was a vast array of folks that are looking at a specific time scale that ranged from 8 weeks of retention and survival to up to 5 years of retention and survival at these sites. No mortality, no predation, or of course that the habitat is modified. And then there was one program that's just measuring success based on the number of beavers that they move, meeting a specific numerical target. And then the metrics used to determine these different definitions of success was also, of course, all over the board. Again, folks are using radio or pit tags. People are looking at riparian vegetation and stream complexity changes, which is great to see. Different modes of survival. Either these projects are precluding lethal management, and that is their only success metric, or post-relocation sign surveys, of course, dam building coupled with water storage, or there's groups that are just looking to establish a sustainable population in a specific watershed. And so this kind of exemplifies this. We asked folks, what percentage of your translocations do you think have been successful? And it's all over the board here. You see a lot of 75, 60 to 80, 100%. Those are the projects that are just looking at survival during the process or are precluding lethal management of beavers. But the programs that are actually receiving funding to monitor hydrologic impact, those are the projects that have 20 to 50, 3.5%, or a lot of unknown. So it's really all over the board, depending on how these programs are defining success for themselves. And so what we hope to do with all of this information is really inform these beaver management practitioners. We'd like to create a best practices guide for relocation based on the goals that they're trying to achieve in relocating these beavers to specific areas. We'd love to provide monitoring guidance and really standardize the methods that are being used regionally to monitor these beavers. So these relocated beavers, so that we have stuff to compare these projects to. We can compare success rates regionally, and that would be awesome. We want to inform future research. There's certainly a need for more control studies so we can eventually, hopefully, perform a meta-analysis. And we also hope that what we produce here can influence policy. We really want to inform beaver relocation funding policy so we can achieve goals like monitoring standardization in certain regions. We need more consistent funding, and we think that maybe it could be helpful to even redefine the term monitoring as it relates to beaver relocation. Have it included as part of the translocation process rather than a post-translocation activity. And then we're really hoping that we can inform state beaver management plans. We would like to help states create and produce these comprehensive state beaver management plans based on the best available science. And that is something that we've actually already begun to do. I have been serving on the technical advisory board for the state of California as they have launched their beaver relocation program in the past year. And I'm super excited to finally be able to announce, I hope most, if not all of you, saw the press release come out yesterday that we did actually release the first family of beavers in California in over 75 years. We did that back in October. And this is a perfect example of collaboration and relying on the experts. They have an awesome group of tribal biologists, academics, state and federal folks, and then nonprofit groups as well that are contributing to this. And it's been really exciting to be a part of. And I think the strength in California CDFW's program is that they are not trying to recreate the wheel. They're not keeping everything internal. They are reaching out to ask questions. And I actually presented all of this preliminary information to them as they were developing their methodologies for this release. And this is just one example of how this research can help inform new programs or existing programs. As of 2 weeks ago, these beavers that were released in October have begun building dams at the release site, and they are all still there. They're using GPS tags to monitor them. They're using game cameras. They're measuring structures. And of course, that's due to the funding legislation that was passed by the state of California. But just one example of how this information can help inform programs and help them establish colonies and have success. And so that is what I've got. Thank you to all of the folks funding this research, and to USU and the Tulalip tribes for allowing me to take time off from work to do this. And now we can definitely open it up to questions. Oop. Let's see. I will leave this up in case anyone wants to go back to anything, but I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
So thanks, Molly. And I'll try to also monitor the chat for you, so you don't have to do too many things at once.
Thank you.
Sandra, her voice is coming through digitized. So it's something, I don't know if you can fix that, but you just want to let you know.
A little robotic.
Yeah.
I don't know how to fix that. I'll be quiet.
Oh, sorry. It happened before, and so I just want to let you know. Molly, thank you so
write
much.
Your sorry, Sandra, maybe you can write your question in the chat and we'll read it out. Yeah, sorry, Jackie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by thanking Molly so much. It's just wonderful to get an update on your really important research. One of the questions that I had that came to mind, and I'm sure this is something you're already doing, but the Beaver Restoration Guide, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Beaver Restoration Guide, is in the process of getting updated, and I'm sure this kind of information would be wonderful for them to have. Have you already made that presentation to those folks?
I have not yet. I have engaged with them via email, but since this is all kind of preliminary, which I hope will be published by spring,
okay,
fingers crossed, I will definitely plan to engage with them and share as much information as I possibly can, because I definitely want all of this information to be included in the new version of the guidebook.
Can you tell me where you're planning on publishing? If you already have a journal lined up or another way?
Determined.
To be determined. Okay.
Yeah. I will get back to you on that. Hopefully,
okay, thanks.
A couple months.
Okay.
I see Rue has his hand raised.
Yeah, I do. That was a really interesting talk, Molly. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You said one of your aims or outcomes you'd hope from this is that you would standardize monitoring or have some guidance on how I'm standardizing monitoring. And when you said that, I was thinking, wow, that's a difficult thing to do, because it'll completely depend on the aims of the project. So if you're releasing animals into a site because you want them to be there to dam that site, then you're going to have, damming presence of beavers in that site. But if you're wanting to restore a population, you don't care if they just wander off into a different river and not build dams. So I was wondering if you had any ideas of how you might standardize so that it could still fit all these multiple purposes.
Yeah. We're trying to tease out right now. I think the way that I'm leaning is kind of standardizing monitoring techniques based on a definition of success. because they really are all over the board, and even folks within the same region are relocating for different purposes. You know, based on regional conditions, there's going to be certain things you can do, certain things you can't do. But I think we're really going to be looking at, if you are determining success in this specific way, these are the monitoring techniques that we recommend to get the best information on whether or not that definition of success is being met.
That sounds like a good way of doing it. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Molly. I'm definitely one of those people who are reluctantly moving beavers because they're otherwise going to get killed. And that's really ramping up for us, unfortunately. I'm starting to make inroads with some of the trappers, and like there's one guy that traps a beaver every other day all year long. And that's just like kind of going to flood us with refugee beavers. So I'm very excited to have BMP suggestions from you all, especially around kind of housing and pairing up beavers and sort of the refreshing of sites in between just the kind of husbandry stuff, especially as we look at feeding beavers over winter and that kind of thing. That seems like it's a big open gap as far as there's a lot of folks like you and the Metau folks who have learned a lot. But I'm excited about, do you have a timeline on the BMPs themselves? That seems like it's discrete from the survey, and kind of what's your vision on the BMPs?
Fingers crossed by the end of spring, beginning of summer, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, that's something that we really saw. We asked a lot of questions in the survey as it relates to how people are housing beavers, if they are, and the facilities are all over the place. You know, there's no real standard. I mean, we do have some prerequisites here in Washington State, but you know, some people are using kiddie pools and dog kennels, and other folks, obviously like us in the Metau, have are lucky to have access to these active fish hatcheries. But yeah, it's all over the place, and it would be great, you know, I would love to say standardizing those prerequisites for husbandry of beavers, but again, going back to funding, and that's what we're really hoping is to you know, highlight the need for at least funding policy changes to provide the necessary funding to do this work right.
Yeah, and I would encourage, I don't know how we've had this discussion with the flow device BMPs, like how to share the disaster stories, but every time I talk to someone who's done any kind of relocation for any amount of time, you've got like epic disaster stories. And how to share those, I don't know, that as someone who's just like, oh no, here we go, we're getting into this. I want to read all the disaster stories possible. So I don't know if that could come out in some way. I would be a big fan.
Yeah, maybe that'll be my next book. But yeah, no, and that's why I was really happy to share the news of our work with CDFW, because they wanted to learn from all of our mistakes. I mean, we've been doing this for 10 years with the Tula Beaver Project, and it's been a lot of trial and error. We've done a lot of things wrong, which has led us to doing a lot of things right. And we don't want these new programs to be recreating the wheel on a lot of these things that we've learned. So it's great to see folks reaching out to us and learning from the experts, learning from the researchers, and using science to inform their decision making in these processes. Brian?
I'll jump in. Yeah, so I'll read Sandra's comment. So her question was, can you broadly summarize who responded to the survey and how that might influence the results? And also, you know, who did not answer, you know, the survey that you would actually like to talk to?
Yeah, so we got the vast majority of our responses came from the American West. There are not a lot of folks moving beavers in the eastern part of the country because lack of availability of habitat to move them. And a lot of folks, which is wonderful to see, are starting to put an emphasis on coexistence, which is really what we want. But in the cases where coexistence isn't possible due to policy constraints or otherwise, we want to provide the best possible information for people that are in a position to physically move beavers around the landscape. Pretty much the same in Canada, not a lot of relocation happening. They have so many beavers. And then we got quite a few from over in Europe, from England and Wales. Looking at you, Rue. We haven't gotten anything from Scotland yet, but I'm still open to it.
Didn't you get? I thought it looked like you got something from that deal there because it was a 5-year monitoring thing. I assumed that was from Scotland.
Oh, maybe I'll have to go back and see.
It might have been Rasheen that
You
that
know what? I
replied.
don't think I heard from Rasheen.
Ah,
Yeah, I'll get
okay.
back to you on that. But yeah, so we've gotten
You should be helping. Yeah.
a handful from over in Europe, not as many as we would have hoped. But yeah, it's really a lot of folks in, Utah, Washington, Oregon, Wyoming, Montana. So yeah, and hopefully soon we'll be getting some preliminary data from California as well.
I have my own follow-up question. Yeah, so also based on the survey, when you were asking about site conditions that may be either beneficial or most likely to impact success, was there anything that was either kind of surprising that you felt like, oh, we should pay more attention to this, or was there, a dominant factor that says, oh, look, it really doesn't matter what the slope is or something, as long as we have dam building material or the, willows or food or something that just far outweighs others? And I know it's, it's a survey, so, but
Yeah.
just from the responses you got.
Yeah, honestly, since the vast majority of the responses came from the American West, water availability is the biggest thing. And something that we hope to incorporate into this BMP document is, and which we do on the Tulilla Beaver Project, is we monitor our sites for about a year prior to considering them as a viable relocation site, because we want to see these locations at high flow, at low flow, any time of the season. But a lot of the places the beavers are being placed, water either goes subsurface during the dry summer months, or they have incredibly flashy flows. So it's great to see that a lot of folks are starting to play around with BDAs. I think that's gonna be a big factor in future relocation success stories. But yeah, water's the biggest thing. And then just the availability of dam building material. Some sites have plenty of food, but we really want to see large woody debris in these creeks. And some folks, of course, doing LTPBR are starting to play around with that at sites that they're preparing for eventual relocation.
Nice, thanks.
Any other lingering questions?
Sorry, I've suddenly lost the raise your hand button. I don't know where it is. Can I ask a question? Another question. It's about you mentioned that some people were GPS tagging, which is incredibly difficult with, or radio tracking, incredibly difficult with beavers. So you said is it Maidu or Maydu project, the one at the end? So they're putting GPS tags on the beavers. How are they doing it?
Yeah, so the CDFW actually, they bought a variety of tags. So they have pit tags, they have, it's mostly tail mount, VHF and GPS tags. And so for this first relocation, both adults in the family were each given either a VHF or a GPS tag. And then I think they all received pit tags with the exception of the kits. So they're really trying to get as much information as possible by putting out a variety of these tags to see what works best, if at all. Because yeah, tracking has been the largest limitation in not being able to collect data on where beavers are going if they're not staying within a monitored reach. And I do think that there is a huge opportunity for some innovation to try and figure out a better way to do it that's less invasive.
Yeah, because presumably with the tails, you're putting a hole through the tail and effectively
Yeah.
bolting it on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it seems that most folks are either the tags are failing for whatever reason, or they're coming out, which means that you're injuring the beaver, and there isn't a great understanding of the lasting effects of something like that happening to a beaver.
No, I think the Norway project, we did that for in Norway for a long time, and I think when they moved out, you could see that there was complete recovery, but the process is still it makes you feel uncomfortable. So
yeah, I've done it a couple of times and I hate it.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, so I'm going to read another question from the chat. So, how
great.
important is it for programs to be housing beavers prior to relocation? Thinking about disease, stress, etc.
Yeah, I think it's very important, specifically from the basis that we need to temporarily house beavers in order to capture entire intact groups or mated pairs. For us, it typically takes us about a week to 2 weeks to capture an entire family group if it's a larger group of more than 6 beavers. So you know, if you hard release these beavers one at a time as you're capturing them, there's no guarantee that they're going to stay put until the rest of the family is placed there. So that's really been the benefit for us. But we're also hoping, at least in Washington, to standardize quarantine times and quarantine methods, looking for aquatic invasives that beavers could possibly be spreading, looking at disease spreading amongst populations. So that's something that we're really hoping to use this information to influence, is kind of standardizing quarantine in certain states.
I guess I read one question from the chat and then I have one of my own.
No worries.
Yeah. So have you come up with some ideas that either you want to share or just know that you're coming up with for kind of standardized monitoring approaches, either methods, metrics, what they should be doing? I know we've talked about this in terms of restoration, like, can we standardize monitoring? And it's really a request. Could everyone collect something that's similar so we could compare across sites? You know, if it's a measure of success, it depends what the goal of the project is, right? You know, and I know we've had these discussions about too site specific, too goal specific, and can you even ask people to do it? Like, do we need rapid assessment, more detailed, you know, and then intensive? Yeah, I'm just curious in terms of relocation. Yeah, that seems like a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It would be hard to ask folks to do a number of things just based on funding availability. You know, and you know, ideally in a perfect world, all of these beavers would be non-invasively tagged in some way so that we could have better tracking information. You know, surface water increase as a proxy for other unseen benefits as the site is a relatively easy one, as long as you have a GPS unit. That's something that we could try and standardize. The other thing is trying to find an entity that will do the monitoring for these projects, rather than relying on the staff of these programs themselves to have to spend the time and the financial resources to go out and do this themselves. It is very time consumptive. So that's an idea that we've played with in trying to convince people that standardizing methods is a good idea without it being a daunting thing for them. Cody, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing some of this data. It's cool to see. I have a question, and it kind of, I started to think about it when we were all at that conference last month. You know, some states, we're really lucky in some ways in Wyoming. We don't have a lot of rules, or not a ton of permitting controlling where we release beavers, how we do it, etc. And I know like in some places like, in Utah, there's the mandatory 3-day quarantine. Talking to everyone at MetHow, there's rules about how close to other beavers. And so I'm curious how you weigh the benefits and potentially negatives with trying to standardize something like some things that to me is pretty dynamic. Just as an example, Utah, they have to quarantine beavers for 3 days. Sometimes we get a beaver in that has a pretty nasty injury from a live trap or maybe from another beaver, and we decide it's best to just get it out right away, because if we're quarantining it, it's swimming in water overnight, that's they're pooping in and things like that. And so I'm curious how you weigh the benefits of kind of sharing this information and promoting standardization with the fact that we're doing like pretty dynamic work, and sometimes over-regulating it can make it more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And by no means do we intend to inform policy or state governments in a way where they can overregulate. These are wild animals that we're moving, and there's a lot of regulations around the movement of other species, whether you're moving elk, whether you're moving seabirds. But we just want to create a list of guidelines that will, and these are recommendations. This isn't going to lead to you having to change the way that you run your program. But yeah, these are wild animals. Sometimes you catch sick and injured wildlife. That's just a fact of the matter, and you have to do what's best for that animal. It's not about achieving a restoration goal at that point. It's about the welfare of that animal. For us, we partner with a local wildlife rehabilitator that has 24-hour vet on staff. And so whenever we capture sick and injured wildlife, that beaver goes straight to the vet and stays with them as long as they need to until they're healed and released back to us. And sometimes there are cases where we have to move that beaver's family while that beaver is under their care, and then we'll release that beaver later to the same location that those beavers were placed, and hope that they find each other. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's incredibly dynamic, and it's going to vary obviously by state. Even by county, there's different regulations, there's different permitting processes. This is just going to be based on the information that we've received. What have we found works the best for people who are trying to achieve specific goals? I hope that answered your question.
Do you have
So
sorry,
go ahead.
do you have a secret magic trick for a trap shy beaver? I'm curious. Like, what's your go-to, somebody who's not feeling very territorial and is like, I'm not going near that thing?
Yeah.
What's your magic go-to?
Typically we find that the first, and I'm sure a lot of you find this, the first couple of nights, you're taking those beavers by surprise, and we have a lot more capture success at the beginning. And then as you capture more and more beavers, they smart up to it. Something that we'll do is we'll take bedding material or chew sticks from the hatchery where their family members have been feeding, and use that scent to attract the beavers, and that has worked pretty well. Obviously, just changing up the lure, we change from different scent-based lures or castor-based lures to food-based lures. That works sometimes. Sometimes beavers are just more interested in food than they are in territoriality with the castor-based lures. So yeah, we don't like to use snares. I know some programs have had great success with snares, but we just don't like it. But yeah, switching up between Hancock and box traps as well has helped. Just the element of surprise, I guess. Yeah, and just really camouflaging traps as best as you can.
Mhm.
And I would say anything that you can do to reduce presence of humans, presence of dogs. I mean, we put a lot of time into, these are really urban or suburban communities that we're trapping in. And we put a lot of time into informing neighboring landowners that this is occurring, telling them the dangers of interfering with these traps. They're dangerous for people. They can be dangerous for the animals themselves if people meddle with them, and especially making sure that people keep, sometimes we're in public parks where there's off-leash dogs, making sure there's signage everywhere, informing people that there's live traps in the area. So yeah, that can certainly interfere with a trapping effort. Anyone else?
Are there any other questions? So are you, I guess you'll share some of your best practices or recommendations. You're going to be writing this up. Will you put out kind of like recommended monitoring tips and tricks? There's kind of some things that don't fit nicely in a peer reviewed journal. But
Absolutely.
hey, we kind of have a sense that this works. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine we'll be producing quite a few things from the information that we've received, guidelines on husbandry, guidelines on best practices for monitoring based on how you're determining success. We'll probably put out at least one, maybe two publications, and then some white papers, and we'll definitely be kind of disseminating those through the Beaver Working Group.
Nice. Any other questions? We're almost out of time. Well, in that case, I
definitely feel free to reach out with any questions. And if there are any of you on the call that for whatever reason did not receive the Beaver Translocation survey, and you would like to fill it out, there is still limited time to do that. So I'm happy to share that with anyone who would like to contribute, but just know that it is very specific to folks that are physically moving beavers around the landscape.
I guess I'll put one shameless plug before we're done. Is I think the disaster stories is a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, the American Alpine Club publishes every year the accidents in North American mountaineering, and people love reading it. And it's person accounts of like how they royally messed up. And it's great to read. And yeah, maybe we should go up on the management working group website where everyone can say,
yeah,
I messed up and I don't have to be so afraid to say so.
I think that would be great. I mean, learn from our mistakes. We've had, especially in terms of the husbandry aspect, I think that is where we have learned the most lessons about how creative beavers can be if they want to escape.
There's one last question about how people should reach out to you.
Oh gosh,
best
silly
email.
me. I did not. I will put my email in the chat. So you can reach out to me at my USU email if you have any questions or would like to access the survey.
Great. If there are no other questions, we'll wrap up. Last chance. I guess it's not your last chance to talk to Molly. She just gave you the email.
Last chance.
Just a real quick question, Molly. How much longer will you be at USU?
I am done physically in Utah. I was just there for this past year to complete coursework, but I will hopefully be wrapping up and defending in April. But I'm back up in Seattle. I'm going back to work on Monday. So I say hopefully by April because I'm going back to work on Monday. So yeah, I will obviously keep you all informed as I reach the end of this adventure.
Okay, great. And then your email goes back to the Tulalip tribe?
Yes.
Email? Okay, great.
Yeah, for any research and school related stuff, you can contact me at the address I just sent, but I can send out my Tulalip email as well if you have kind of more programmatic questions.
Great. Okay. Well, then I think, yeah, so thank you, Molly, so much. This is a great talk again. So I guess I'll just schedule you in for a year from now and we'll do this annually. Yeah, you can be our kickoff. Even though it ends of the year, you actually start us off every time. So yeah, I'll just put you down now on the schedule. Yeah,
Perfect.
so thank you so much. That was a great talk and really good information. And thanks everyone for showing up. And yeah, we're looking forward to a really exciting, 2024 and hopefully get more great speakers like this. So if you want to present or somebody, or even if you just say, hey, we should have more talks on this topic. Can't guarantee it, but it would still be good to know what do people want. It's your working group. So yeah, with that, we can wrap up, and just a big thank you to Molly. So.
Thank you, guys. And I also just want to put in a quick plug for BeaverCon 2024 in Boulder. In October next year. Would love to see you all there. I will definitely be planning to present the results of this research there. And then we'll also be in at the International Beaver Conference in Scotland in 2025.
Oh,
so
nice.
everyone, yeah, see you there, Rue.
Great.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you.